Yes, we're coming to the end of the first waypoint, reawakening your true self. But before we go, we're going to take a stop by a little church just off exit 13 and see if we can fill your life to the brim. The good pastor didn't start his sermon from the pulpit this Sunday morning. Instead, he walked in before the congregation to stand behind a table laid out with a couple of odd items. Looking out over his curious flock, he then looked down and slowly moved a large, empty glass jar before him. Reaching into one smallish box on the table, he began removing handfuls of candy jawbreakers. As gently as he could, he began filling the jar with these gobstoppers until the huge balls of hard candy reached the top. He bent over to set the box on the floor and, standing back up, asked the crowd if the jar was full. They agreed that it was. He asked them if they were sure. They were. The pastor then picked up the only other small box on the table. This one was filled with colorful jelly beans, which he began pouring into the jar. He had to shake the glass container several times, of course, to get the sweet oblong delights to drop down between each jawbreaker. When he had filled the gaps from bottom to top, he set the box on the floor and again asked his assemblage if the jar was full. They agreed that it was. He asked them if they were sure. Seeing that only the jar remained on the table, the congregation still agreed that it was. The pastor raised his eyebrows and replied, "Oh, really?" and reached under the table to lift yet another small box. This one held a bag of sugar, which he opened and slowly poured into the jar. When the sand-like sugar moved down between the jawbreakers and jelly beans, eventually filling the jar to the brim, the pastor asked once more if it was full. The congregation laughed and responded with a unanimous yes. "Now, my brothers and sisters," said the pastor as the laughing subsided, "I want you to understand that this jar represents your life. These huge jawbreakers inside are the important things, like your faith, your family, and your health." He then grabbed the jar near the bottom with both hands and, with an embellished grunt, lifted it to his eyes. Peering into the jar and then around to the group for dramatic effect, he continued, "The jelly beans inside are the other things that matter to you but are not so big. They could be your job, your house, your savings, and your car. The sugar? Well, that's just everything else in your busy life. It's the small stuff you like so much but could certainly do without. You see, if everything else in this jar was emptied out and only the jawbreakers remained, know that your life would still be full." Setting the jar back down on the table, the pastor took a more serious tone and commanded, "But hear me, folks. If you put the sugar in this jar first, let it be filled to the brim with only a multitude of life's smaller desires, then guess what? There's no room for the jawbreakers or even the jelly beans. It's been filled with only desires. And could that be the truth in your life, friends? Are you spending all your time, all your energies focused only on the small stuff? Have you placed all that inside your jar before the big things that are truly important to you?" No one in the congregation said a word. The good pastor knew he had their minds going at that point. Then, without a word, he purposely walked from the table over to the kitchen window at the side of the nave. Once there, the curious congregation remained silent as he nonchalantly poured tea from a gallon jug into a big plastic cup. When it was mostly full, he took the cup and walked back to the table. Just as he arrived there, he began slowly and carefully pouring the tea into the jar, not allowing a drop to spill as it soaked into its sugary contents. But while doing so, he began speaking again, this time in a softer, more passionate tone. "Pay attention, my friends, to the big gobstoppers that are critical to your true faith and happiness. Give honor and humility to God the Father. Teach and play with your children. Pay attention to your health and live long. And my goodness, please go out to dinner once in a while with your spouse, huh? There'll always be time later to do the laundry or mow the lawn. Set your life's priorities. Fill your jar, your life, with the big things first. Then, dear people, May you squeeze in all the little things that you have room for. The last drop of tea from the pastor's cup finally dripped inside the jar, filling it to the very brim. Still looking down at it, he dipped an index finger into the mix, pulled it back out, and stuck it in his mouth with a childish grin. Then, somewhere mid-pew, a laughing church member yelled out to the pastor, asking if the jar was finally full. In response, the pastor stood straight up, laughed, and said he believed that it was now. Then another member yelled, "Pastor, I get it, but what in the world does the tea represent?" The pastor paused, looked down at the jar for a moment, back up to the congregation, and answered, "I'm glad you asked. See, no matter how full your life might seem, how much you've managed to cram into your jar, know that there's always, always room to have a nice cup of sweet tea with your pastor." I'll leave you to your thoughts.